Ignoring the positive drug test from Davenport, the head of the drug abuse program, was indicative of the general malaise surrounding the whole program. It was all a big joke, at the expense of the drug addicts who needed help. One day I was logging in a urine sample which was very colourful. At first I thought there was something seriously wrong with the GI who'd submitted it, but when I looked closer I saw a gummy bear, the equivalent of a jelly baby sweet, bobbing up and down inside. I just threw it into the bag along with the others to be tested. Earlier on I would have reported it, but what was the point? At least it would give the Landstuhl lab a laugh. I might have mentioned that the social side of working at the 5th General was non-stop. Beyond the Friday night regular hash-laced brownie parties, there were picnics, trips to the zoo, a British rock fest, and local Bad Cannstatt spring fests. There were usually no less than 10 people wherever we went, a few of us girls and, of course, GIs. Sarah, the Texas redhead from the lab, asked me if I wanted to join her and a couple of the guys, which meant 6 to 8 military, at the Stuttgart Spring Festival. It was being held in the fairgrounds in Bad Cannstatt, and of course there was a beer tent. After clinking a few steins to the Papa band, we wandered outside and went on a couple of rides. Then Sarah spotted the shooting gallery and was determined to win a big prize. She tried over and over, but never won anything decent, even though I felt she deserved better prizes. The German man who ran the stall had a bad attitude, while obviously enjoying taking this big red-headed Yankee's money. It annoyed me so much that while the stall holder was taking Sarah's money for another round, I surreptitiously took a few stuffed toys off the stall and hid them in my bag. As I was quietly walking away, Sarah came running after me to say that she'd finally won a bigger prize. She held up a medium-sized teddy bear. "Well done," I said. Then I pulled out 3 more soft toys from my bag. "You won these too." Sarah was amazed that I would do such a thing, and from then on called me Klepto, and enjoyed regaling everyone with the story. Perhaps it was the beer or the schnapps that made me steal, but it was really because I felt a sense of injustice. The stallholder was taking advantage of Sarah and seemed to be treating her with disdain. I didn't like that. I'm not condoning stealing from anyone, but for me it was a spontaneous action without fear of consequences, and it was a bit of fun too. But Sarah had paid for the toys over and over again, so I felt justified in my action. I know, not the right attitude, but I felt I was standing up for Sarah. I think you might sense a theme here. Back at the Wednesday drug therapy group, I was ready to argue for the psychodrama, or at least discuss having one-on-one sessions with the drug addicts, but I didn't get an opportunity. That wasn't the way it was going to go. "Today, we're going to do something a little different," Dr. Davenport declared. "We're going to psychoanalyze Marie." I was taken aback, naturally, and didn't know what to expect, but I was soon to find out. He said they would go around the circle and everyone would say what they thought of me. The drug addicts would not be participating. "You can all go back to sleep," he told them. My immediate thought was, oh my God, I've got to get out of here. But it was almost as if a higher voice was speaking to me, and I heard, "Stay, you can take it. You're bigger than all of this." Maybe that was my ego speaking, but nonetheless, I sat there and waited for the onslaught. Davenport instructed the straights to speak as if I wasn't there, and I was told I could only say, "I hear you," and nothing else until the end. And so it began. They said that I had a morbid curiosity about drugs. I liked mothering the guys. I was insulting the intelligence of the professionals with my infantile games. I was disruptive, sticking my nose, except they mentioned another body part, in stuff I didn't know anything about. Then it escalated and became vulgar. I would never want to repeat here the disgusting things they said, but it was along the lines that I got my fix from sleeping with the drug addicts and especially with black GIs. Even those who had agreed with my psychodrama suggestions and I thought had supported me said something negative about me. My stomach was in knots, but I also felt strangely calm. At the end of their barrage of abuse, they said I could respond. Since swearing was a huge part of the vocabulary they all used in the therapy group, I said, "I can only respond in a language I think you'll understand. The whole thing pees me off." It was the strongest swear word I could come up with, and they all laughed at that. "Well, that was a great way to kill a couple of hours," Davenport said, and they all got up to leave. Not one of the straights approached me to say anything reassuring, but the drug addicts did. "You okay, ma'am?" Watts, a black GI from Tennessee, asked me. It felt as if I was one of them now. I was really touched that these young men were there to support me and that they cared about me as much as I cared about them. Catherine from Liverpool, who worked as a secretary in the psychiatric clinic, heard what her bosses did to me in the group, and although at the time she didn't say anything to me, as our friendship developed over the years, she said that this so-called psychoanalyst was done by people who didn't know what they were doing and should never have been allowed. I actually spoke to her a few days ago and she said, "What they did to you, Marie, was murder of the soul and could have really damaged you." But it didn't. It made me stronger. I gave a TEDx talk a couple of years ago on the nature of character arc in stories. Every experience in life contributes to our development as human beings and changes us in some way. We just have to be willing to get involved. It's being open to the possibilities of what life can offer and being able to live spontaneously without fear. It's trusting your gut feeling, or I like to think of it as my inner voice, and knowing that the plot twists are there for a reason, to embellish your character, to make you who you were meant to be. I didn't tell anyone about my therapy session, but word soon got around. Major Cardell, who'd supported me with the suggestions I'd made for improvements in the group, was absolutely furious with Davenport and his sidekick Rogers. "I had no right to subject you to their insanity," he told me. I didn't blame him. It was my choice to get as involved as I did. My friend Hines, the race relations officer, was also there for me, and everyone in the lab was on my side, and Dave too. I was disappointed, however, that my girlfriends didn't support me, especially Pat. There had been some strain between us, I must admit, because of the fact that GIs were always knocking on my door. These were kids who just needed someone to talk to, and I was a friend, a sister figure, and yes, perhaps a mother figure too. The following weekend, after my recovery from being pulled apart by the straits in the group therapy session, my friend Angela was coming to visit me from Coventry. Her visit coincided with a 3-day rock festival held in a huge field near Heidelberg. I don't think poor Angela knew what had hit her. I'd been at the hospital for several months and of course was now very accustomed to the presence of drugs, mainly hash, and the general craziness of the residents, whether they be lifers, career soldiers, or GIs. It was definitely a culture shock on a major level, and that was before we even got to the Rockfest. We all set off from the 5th General in a combine of vehicles loaded with tents, army-issue sleeping bags, and enough food and drink to last us for the 3 days. We couldn't believe our eyes when we got to the site. It was wall-to-wall bodies and tents. Later we learned that over 70,000 people attended this British rock festival, the majority of whom were American military. We managed to find a spot to erect our tents, but it was quite a distance from the main stage. I think we got there too late. Anyway, if we wanted to get close enough to see the likes of Pink Floyd, Fleetwood Mac and Rod Stewart, we had to wind our way through all the bodies, being careful not to step on anyone. But that was the easy part. Trying to find our way back was a real challenge. In the end, most of us decided to stay put. Fortunately, the sound system was fantastic. So even though we could only glimpse the musicians from afar, this did not impede the quality of the music they played. Then there were the lights and sound effects that accompanied each band. They were great. Naturally, there was a lot of pink light for Pink Floyd, and of course purple for Deep Purple. It was quite an extra sensory experience. Really great. Towards the end of the first day, the rain came and continued pretty much through the whole of the second day. Anyone who's been to music festivals in bad weather will get the picture. It was wet and muddy everywhere, and we were all very uncomfortable. No glamping at this festival. Food mainly consisted of army sea rations, which were combat rations soldiers took with them when they were fighting. These were small cans of prepared meals, such as ham and eggs, beans, chili. Oh, and there was chocolate pudding, which was actually pretty good. One of the guys had bought a saucepan and a propane stove, so we were able to warm up the meals and add a few more ingredients to elevate the taste. Then we supplemented with crackers and cheese, fruit, and hash brownies, of course. But hash wasn't the only drug on the menu. While Hare Krishnas weaved their way through the crowd, chanting and playing their tambourines, looking for converts, drug dealers were coming in the other direction with a steady supply of every drug imaginable, from heroin to paper dynamite and orange sunshine, which I understood to be some form of LSD. I had no intention of finding out. Going to the toilet was quite a feat, and once we'd managed to get through the crowd to the portable toilets, the queues were ridiculously long. Then, of course, we had to find our way back again. The guys had bought water in their canteens. No plastic bottles then. So we were able to wash our hands and brush our teeth with the trickle we were allowed. I don't recall too much else about the festival, except that it wasn't quite as much fun as I'd anticipated. It seemed that to truly appreciate the madness, it was necessary to get stoned. Since drinking any kind of alcohol was out of the question because of the aforementioned trek to the portable toilets, I admit to nibbling hash brownies. I do know, though, that after the 3rd day, I was very relieved to get back to the comparative quiet of the hospital to have a bath and a cup of tea, as was Angela. She said she'd never felt so dirty in her life. I think that went beyond the mud. and was actually a reaction to the whole experience. I felt bad afterwards that I'd exposed her to a side of life that was so alien to her. Well, some of it to me too. But at least she had stories to tell. It could have been worse, though. I didn't mention to Angela that there'd been some talk that the Baader-Meinhof gang was going to plant car bombs at the festival. Thankfully, that didn't happen, although there had been an explosion at a US Army base in Hamburg the day before the festival started. Then a day after the festival, the anarchists placed explosives in a car at another US Army base in Heidelberg. Several people were killed and injured there. That amped up the security even more at the hospital, especially when these German terrorists were threatening to plant bombs in 3 cars in Stuttgart, apparently in response to American involvement in the Vietnam War. Letters signed by the Red Army faction, an alternate name for Baader-Meinhof, were sent to news organizations giving the time and date the bombs would explode. The city was shut down for the specified hour between 1 p.m. and 2 p.m. and remained closed for the rest of the day. And fortunately, nothing happened. No bombs exploded. Andreas Baader and Ulrich Meinhof were arrested a few weeks later and ironically were imprisoned in Stuttgart. They both committed suicide there a few years later. But the Red Army faction, the RAF, continued their bloody acts of rebellion well into the 90s, finally disbanding in 1998. I'm sure you're not surprised to learn that I decided not to return to the drug therapy group. But I was always available to the drug addicts. I told them that, if they needed to talk, especially since no one else seemed interested in being there for them. I was sitting at my desk alone in the office when a tall, thin, auburn-haired GI I'd never seen before ran in and closed the door. I thought maybe he'd come to have a chat. But no. As he rocked back and forth, almost like a caged animal, I could tell that this was someone who was deeply troubled. Then when he said, "I'm gonna kill ya," it confirmed my initial diagnosis. I gulped. Why do you want to do that? He stared at me with crazed eyes and repeated, "I'm gonna kill ya." He then picked up my small stapler and raised it in the air as if he was going to strike me with it. I didn't say anything, I didn't panic. I just looked at him, trying to make a connection. But his eyes didn't register me at all. In his delusional state, he wasn't seeing me. I was simply a figure in whatever scenario was playing out in his poor, disturbed mind. Suddenly, the office door that was never closed was flung open, and 2 ward orderlies rushed in and grabbed the agitated young man. Relieving him of the stapler and placing it back on my desk, one of the orderlies, a big Latino guy, said, "Sorry, ma'am, he got away from us. Are you okay?" I nodded. Then he asked if the GI had hurt me. "Oh, just my feelings," I joked. Once again, I was surrounded by my friends from the lab who were concerned for my safety, and they were impressed how cool I was. I might not have been so calm if he'd been wielding a gun or a knife, but I felt safe enough with his weapon of choice. I didn't think he was going to staple me to death. Also, I had that inner feeling again that everything was going to be okay. I knew I was somehow protected by a higher power. Remember Dave, the handsome black cook? Well, we were seeing each other quite often, but kept it fairly quiet. However, after the comments made to me in the therapy group about my relationship with black GIs, innocent as they were, I decided to blow all caution to the wind and began spending more time with Dave and his friends, which brought yet more drama into my life. You may remember Carter, the orderly on the drug ward, who escorted addicts into the lab. And you may also recall that even though the addicts were meant to be supervised by Sergeant Friedlander as they gave their daily offering of the golden flow, he was too embarrassed to do this and looked the other way. This gave Carter the opportunity to substitute his own clean urine for some of the addicts, which meant he could still supply them with heroin, but at a price. Carter had flirted with me from the first time he came into the lab, but even before I knew of his duplicitous dealings, he made me feel uncomfortable. I didn't like him. He wanted to take me out to a German club to meet a few girls he knew, but I kept making excuses. Then when I started seeing Dave more regularly, I think he got the message. One night, Dave and his best friend Sutton and I visited a Stuttgart jazz club called the Blue Note. Sutton was a lovely guy, part Puerto Rican, part black, and worked as a cook in the mess hall with Dave. He was a quiet, sweet guy and well-liked. His face was pockmarked and several unrelated scars were also visible. Dave was very protective of him. "He's seen some stuff," he once told me, but never elaborated. Since Sutton had spent quite a bit of time in Vietnam, I could only imagine the kind of stuff he'd seen. Just as we were sitting drinking beer and enjoying the live jazz, Carter walked in with 4 attractive German girls in their early 20s and a couple of guys around the same age who I presumed to be military since they had short haircuts. They sat at a table across from us, and both Dave and Sutton reacted strongly with a few expletives to Carter's presence. Then when he came over to our table, Sutton became visibly upset. "Cool it," Dave said to Sutton. "It's okay." Totally ignoring Dave and Sutton, Carter spoke directly to me. "Want to meet my girls now?" he said. I didn't answer. "Get lost, Carter," Dave said. Carter held up his hands as if in submission. "You got it." Then he went back to his table, giving me a backwards look and a wink. It was very creepy. It was then that I started to get more of an insight into who Carter really was. "He's bad news," Dave said. He told me that the girls were prostitutes and that Carter had been pimping them and other girls to military as well as civilians. He was also a major drug dealer, not only within the military, but the Stuttgart community. He had contacts with German businessmen, lawyers, and police, providing them with their drug of choice. It seemed that he wielded a lot of power and was untouchable. As far as I was aware, Dave never did drugs, certainly not in my presence. He smoked menthol cigarettes, a brand called Cools with a K. But Sutton certainly used drugs, which he got from Carter. Since Carter's arrival at the club, the whole mood had changed, so we decided to leave. As we passed his table, Carter said, "See you later, girl," which made me cringe, and Dave seethed with anger. But he held it together, and we were all relieved to get out into the fresh air, especially Sutton, who was quieter than usual and looked worried as we took a cab back to the hospital. Dave walked me to my building, gave me a kiss and said he was going back to the barracks with Sutton and would see me the next day. I totally understood because I could see that Sutton was quite upset. I just changed into my nightie when there was a knock on the door. Thinking perhaps Dave had changed his mind, I opened the door and Carter stood there. He said he needed to talk to me about something. Before I could respond, he pushed his way into my room. He then pinned me against the wall. "What the hell are you doing?" I said, trying to wriggle away from his firm grip. He was intent on having me, as he put it. "Get off me! Get off!" I yelled. I was hoping that Pat would hear me, since our rooms were only divided by a shared bathroom. Fortunately, her boyfriend Mike, the guy she eventually married, was just leaving her room and heard me. He rushed in, with Pat close behind, before Carter could do any damage, and I was very relieved. Mike was ready to punch him, but Carter just stood there boldly, with no sense of remorse at all, and calmly walked out the door. I was naturally shaken up, but was very grateful that Mike had been there to save the day. "You gotta stop messing with these guys," Mike said, as if it was my fault. I never told Dave what happened with Carter, and for the next couple of weeks carried on as normal, ignoring Carter when he came into the lab. I had become friends with a few black women in the military who wanted to start a drama group and asked if I'd help organise it. I was also spending time with Heinz, the race relations officer, and his family, and of course Dave. So it seemed that most of my friends at that time were black Americans. This was when my relationship with Pat and some of my other friends began to break down, and when the nasty slurs about my friendship with black military began to escalate. I still had several good friends in the lab, and Major Cardell was always very supportive, although I don't think he was aware exactly what was going on. It was a Monday morning and I was getting ready for work when there was a loud banging on my door. I opened it and Catherine stood there. "One of the cooks was murdered last night, shot 5 times behind the mess hall." I was in shock. "Oh my God, no!" I rushed past her, down the stairs in the direction of the mess hall, but military police had it all cordoned off. "Who was killed?" I asked. "Can't say, ma'am. You gotta move back." I didn't know what to do. I turned and ran into Dave's barracks, which were forbidden for women, and especially civilians, but I didn't care. I called Dave's name. "Dave! Dave Walton! Dave!" Through the haze of smoke from cigarettes and hash pipes, a GI appeared, who I recognised. "He's not here." Was he killed? Was he killed? "No, it was Sutton," the GI said. "Oh no." As I ran out of the barracks, I bumped into my friend Heinz. "What happened, Heinz? And where's Dave?" He told me that no one knew yet why Sutton had been murdered, but that Dave was being interviewed by the police and was a possible suspect. "That's ridiculous. He's Sutton's best friend. Why would he kill him? Anyway, it's not in Dave's nature. He's gentle, he's kind. He wouldn't do a thing like that." Heinz just shook his head. "He's not under arrest. They're questioning everyone. Don't worry, honey. The truth will come out." "What can I do?" I said. Heinz told me just to go back to work and he'd find out what he could. I was too upset to concentrate on work, and when the drug addicts came into the lab to give their usual offering, I was surprised and relieved to see another ward orderly with them and not Carter. Apparently, he was also being interviewed about Sutton's murder. It later transpired that Sutton had been killed over a drug deal gone wrong, and Carter was the likely culprit. But a lot of people were protecting him and giving him alibis. Dave was still on the hook, since he was the last person seen with Sutton. Then, When Heinz told me that my name had come up as being involved with both Sutton and Carter and their drug dealings, I was stunned beyond belief. In the next episode, you'll hear of my decision to leave the 5th General Hospital while I was still sane. But there are many more dramas and adventures ahead. So I hope you'll keep listening.